Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, Luke seemed sufficiently flustered during the football party. Are you still wearing the mask, or has the mask become a part of you?
I'm glad that you phrased it that way, because I was worried for a second that one of the available options you were going to give me was that I took off the mask. And no, the only two options are I'm wearing the mask or I've become the mask. So we're on the same page there. And if I reveal more, I will compromise my efforts. So I will leave that up to you to deduce based off of my answer.
I will say, you don't sound as muffled as you did. That must be a production thing on my end. I must be a superior producer in order to help.
I think that's playing a pretty big role. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm willing to take credit for things that aren't real. I've been doing this for years. I'm a parent. I'm just used to this. Oh, yeah, he's doing this now. That was clearly something I had something to do with. It's great. Well, yeah. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We decided not to tape on Monday night, both because of exhaustion and because the trade deadline was about to happen, and maybe something interesting was going to happen involve the Vikings. Turns out we live in interesting times. So we definitely have something to talk about there. So we'll be doing that. We'll be doing a review of the victory over the Cardinals and go into the mailbag as well. But before we start, once again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. Again, we will be doing a live show on November 17th over at the Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota. This is going to be great. We are going to be giving away a ticket to the Monday Night Football game, Vikings versus Cowboys. So if you are interested in the game, if you are interested in Norse Code, if you're interested in grabbing a drink with us, if you're interested in getting into an argument with Arif in person, if you are interested in getting a picture taken with the Laquan Treadwell jersey before it goes to its forever home, because I ain't taking this thing back, come out.
I understand that this is a highly anticipated and requested aspect of coming to the live show. So
yes,
book your tickets now. There are no tickets. There is no booking system, but nevertheless,
yes, come
book
out.
Your tickets now, so you have room to take pictures with the Laquan Treadwell jersey.
Yep. No, clear out the space on your phone in order to make sure you have plenty of space for pictures. I'm gonna have a sign up that says "No flash photography, please." Just like, I'm sorry, the jersey is a diva. I don't know what to tell you. A non-productive diva. But November 17th, live show at Union 32 Craft House. We had so much fun last time. Come out. It'll be a blast this time as well. No wine bottle to give to Arif, but we'll see what we can do. Maybe a shirt or two to throw away as well.
That one's really strange.
I know, right? I don't even know why I wrote that. But November 17th, check us out, Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to the bonus material, you get access to the Discord, and so much more. Just put out on Sunday an hour and a half bonus episode with a bunch of great stuff, including Ben Natan explaining why he was a Republican. Which was great.
Oh, I didn't even know we had that recorded. Fantastic news.
You kept referring to it as great Patreon material during the recording of it.
You know, as soon as this podcast ends, I lose all memory of anything I've said. This has been established
long time listeners are aware of this since like episode 4. Yep. So this is 100% true. But we've got great stuff. We have the uncensored reaction to Luke Braun's surprise appearance on the show, and so much more. We accidentally went down a rabbit hole involving National Best Friends Day as well. So it's there's a lot of great material in this bonus episode. I highly suggest you take a look at it over at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can also go over to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. and check us out there. It's a one-time donation. And just wanted to say a special thank you to Carter Good, who says, long-time weekly listener, appreciate what you guys do, hoping to get up there for the Cowboys game. Thank you, Carter, so much for the donation over on PayPal. So again, paypal.me/NorseCode. You can also go to norsecode.threadless.com, and it's just about the season to be picking up your Wreath outfits. So go ahead and get your sweaters, your jumpers, your shower curtains, all of that over at norsecode.threadless.com. So, all of the shilling aside, thanks so much for listening. Let's get into the trade deadline, because the Vikings made a move, and it really seemed to like be spurred by the injury to Irv Smith, and it wasn't widely reported just how bad the injury was, but the Vikings have decided to take a chance on another tight end.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of told that Irv Smith was week to week, so interesting. They moved him to injured reserve to make room for tight end TJ Hawkinson, who they traded with the Lions for. The trade compensation, I'm going to try this off the top of my head. The Vikings traded away a second-round pick from this year and a third-round pick from next year, and received back a fourth-round pick this year and a conditional fourth-round pick next year. The condition is that if the Vikings win a playoff game this year, that future fourth-round pick actually loses value and becomes a fifth-round pick. And so, assuming that the Vikings win a playoff game, which is quite the assumption if you've been following this podcast, although, hey, they're 6-1, who cares? That means it is a second and a third for a fourth and a fourth and TJ Hawkinson, or fourth and a fifth and TJ Hawkinson. So the Vikings essentially swapped down 2 rounds in both of those categories this year and next year in order to acquire Hawkinson. I did not look up the actual capital value by the various calculators, but essentially in my brain, this comes out to a late third round pick. That's, maybe I'm wrong. I didn't look it up on a calculator, but trading essentially for a 1.5, 2 year contract, essentially, tight end that has a lot of, I think, receiving upside, for essentially a third round pick. And then you have to pay the guy. You technically have to pay him next year because, at least in the parlance of how people talk about paying people, because of the 5th year option being already activated. But that is the breakdown of the trade as far as I can remember. I know that when we podcast, I'm usually more prepared. But no, I just feel like I want to do this one flying by the seat of my pants. I'm pretty sure those details are correct.
As long as you say the wrong things confidently,
it's something I've learned.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's very kind of Skip Bayless is my model here.
And his love of the Chicago Bears running back Armstrong.
Yeah. Wow. Deep cut.
That was amazing to watch the clip of his. He spent a good 2 minutes talking about how great the running back on the Bears was, and kept referring to him as Armstrong. This player does not exist. It is just
beautiful stuff.
Yes. So TJ Hawkinson, tight end, drafted in the top 10 by Detroit, has been I say a cornerstone of their offense. I've always, and correct me if I'm wrong because I've been saying this for a while, that a tight end can be a crutch for a really terrible quarterback, or at least a terrible offensive system. It's dump passes sometimes. So TJ Hawkinson has spent his career in Detroit playing for Matthew Stafford for a year, and then had Jared Goff. Nobody was really setting the world on fire in Detroit, and he kept on getting hurt. Is that an accurate description of his career so far?
I mean, he's missed, I think, 9 games so far due to injury. I'm going to double check that. So that's what I'm going to look up. I'm not going to look at the trade compensation. I'm going to look at the number of games he's missed.
Priorities.
Let's see. Yeah, actually, 9 games. Wow, nailed that one. God, I am so good at podcasting, guys. Uh, so he's missed 9 games, 4 of them in 2019, his rookie year, 5 of them in 2021 last year. The injury concern has always been apparently kind of an issue. You talk to Detroit writers, and the injury thing always comes up, despite not having missed an enormous amount of games, but having missed a substantial amount in 2 out of the 3 years. It's the same reason that we call Dalvin Cook injury prone, even though he doesn't always miss a ton of games, right? So that's part of it. But Hawkinson, just generally speaking, has been a very productive receiving tight end. He's averaged over the course of his career 44 yards a game. If you exclude his rookie year, which is obviously his least productive year, at least you would hope it would be, he has averaged 48 yards a game. He's actually had a really productive year this year, averaging 56 yards a game. So he's always been kind of a useful tool for the quarterbacks in Detroit. And like you said, they don't have a remarkable receiving core, and so he's been a big part of the way that offense operates, especially in 2020 when he got 723 yards, which I believe led that team in receiving. Again, this is a team that was missing. It used to have like Calvin Johnson, and then it used to have like Marvin Jones, right? This team does not. It's like that team had like Mohamed Sanu. Yes, he played for the Lions. It had Danny Amendola. Yes, he played for the Lions. It had my favorite nothing receiver, Marvin Hall. I just loved him. Okay, so in 2019 they did have Marvin Jones, who did almost get 1,000. But yeah, I mean, he was their second receiver. Yeah, he was billed as a multi-capable tight end coming out of Iowa, as every tight end out of Iowa is. But in this case, it made a lot of sense because for the first 3 or so years at Iowa, he was almost entirely, exclusively a blocking tight end before he exploded in receiving yards alongside fellow first-round pick tight end Noah Fant. And so he was seen in some ways as a blocking first tight end and then as a receiving tight end. But here he's kind of made his way in a big way as a receiving threat.
It's interesting to think that he's going within the division, and maybe this is just a Kwesi thing. Maybe Kwesi just wants to only trade within the division. I mean, it's a bold move. It seems to have worked for the Christian Watson thing, but it still seems odd that Detroit would be willing to get rid of a major piece, a major young piece of their rebuild, and 2, would be willing to do that to a division rival that they'll see twice a year.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if this is just happenstance or if this is intentional, right? Because you would think that acquiring players within division would be more expensive than usual. And selling players, I guess, is kind of where you get that advantage. But the Vikings haven't been doing that. They've been selling picks, but the trade for the Lions was not a particularly expensive trade for the Lions to take. In fact, it was a cheap one, historically speaking. Now, the Packers one, that's a little bit different. That turned out to be, well, I shouldn't say turned out to be. At the time, it was a good deal for the Vikings, both in terms of expected return based on historical draft outcomes and market returns based on historical draft trades. So that one was fine. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe, he just thinks, hey, there's only 31 teams you can trade with. There's no reason to artificially restrict your market. Buy 3 teams because that's 10% of your market gone. That reduces your, it could be like that, or it could just be, hey, within the division, there's kind of like a misallocation of resources, and I want to take advantage of that. So I don't know what it is, but maybe he likes to trade. Actually, that wouldn't make sense either because most of the trades have happened were draft picks, not players. I was going to say maybe he likes to trade because there's some sort of like advantage to getting some inside knowledge in your opponent, but it's not like the Vikings used pick number 66 to learn about what the Green Bay Packers do, right? Like that doesn't help you. But I think he just doesn't restrict his market, and it just happens to be the case that the best trade partners in at least 3 of those trades were within the division. I guess he hasn't traded with the Bears yet, has he? So we could hit the cycle soon.
I suppose anything's possible at this point, but why would the Lions jettison Hawkinson at this point?
So they will have to come to a long-term deal with Hawkinson. That's always going to be part of the calculation when it comes to players late in their rookie deal. So that's part of it. My former coworker, Colton Pouncey, who now writes about the Lions over at The Athletic, wrote a pretty big piece about why they would part ways with Hawkinson. And this actually speaks to something that I wanted to bring up because I was a little bit surprised based off of what I'd seen of Hawkinson and what his reputation was, which is that both Pouncey and I, of course, talked to Jeremy Reisman, who is the frequent Lions guest that we have on the show to preview the Lions, about TJ Hawkinson. And both of them, both in Pouncey's article and Reisman to me in Twitter DMs, were like, yeah, Hawkinson's not really as much of a blocker as his reputation suggests. His PFF grade for blocking this year and last year were both quite low. That's not really the kind of team, the Lions are building. That part doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. This is an opportunity for the Lions to showcase a lot of the young talent that they believe in a lot. This person was not drafted by the current Lions regime. But I don't know, something kind of just feels a little bit off. I think it's more about the contract than it is about any of that, because even though Dan Campbell is a very, run the ball down their throats kind of guy, everybody, all 11 players on the field need to be blocking, including the guy with the ball, he's one of those guys, right? I still think that he would appreciate having a tight end of the receiving caliber of Hawkinson. And what's really interesting to me is like Pouncey mentioned his PFF grade in his piece, that is blocking grade was like a 45 or something along those lines this year. When you take a look at those PFF grades, and he actually had a really good blocking grade back in 2019, right? And so before Dan Campbell arrived, he was actually pretty good. So obviously the blocking scheme that has changed since Dan Campbell took over, for whatever reason, it might demand more of Hawkinson. He might have to do a lot of inline blocking, whereas before his blocking might have been from the slot up onto a safety or a linebacker at the second level as opposed to an edge rusher. Those things will impact, how well you're blocking and stuff like that. I haven't looked at it into a ton of detail, but there are circumstances where he can be an effective blocker. And so maybe, the Vikings can recover some pretty good blocking from him, even though he's not as versatile as a blocker as maybe it would have seemed, or maybe they just ask so much of the tight ends that it's very difficult to get a good blocking tight end out of all of that. So I found that kind of curious that, he has not been as good of a blocker as his reputation would suggest, because what I've watched of him when I have watched the Lions in a little bit more detail has shown me a pretty good blocker. What I find really interesting, though, this is his best year in terms of yards per route run. This is his best year in yards per game, so that kind of matches. But also, they've been running fewer routes because they are a very run-the-ball team, even when they're down by 2 scores. And so there aren't very many opportunities for him to get out into a pass pattern and catch the ball. And the fact that he's increased his yards per game as opposed to decrease, it tells me that he's been making the most of those opportunities. 1.87 yards per route run is really high up there. And what's kind of cool is that there's actually a new tool just got unveiled by 538 that includes a bunch of ESPN tracking data, or ESPN, not the tracking data itself, but ESPN has built some models that account for different aspects of receiving based off of tracking data. And those models are now kind of available in terms of charts that you can sort of 538. So they've got in open score, how open is that player from play to play to play, based off of things like position and the play that you call, how long the play is, defenders, stuff like that. How well you catch the ball based off of, catch expectation. We already know about expected completion percentage from the quarterback side, which takes into account things like pressure, the distance to the sideline, the distance to the nearest defender, the depth of target downfield, whether it's to the right, left, or the middle, that sort of thing. Now this just gets flipped onto the receiver and another score as well as a composite score. So Hawkinson in that accounting actually is like the number 5 tight end in the league in terms of that tracking data. In terms of yards per route run, let's see, I've got PFF up right now. If I use 20 targets as my cutoff, Hawkinson ranks 5th. So that actually matches what the 538 analytical model comes up with. So Kelsey first, that comes as no surprise. Andrew second, not a huge surprise. After that, it's David Njoku, who's having a really great year, kind of somewhat unique because he hasn't had a strong career. Dallas Goedert at Philadelphia, which, if you've been paying attention to the Eagles, is not a huge surprise. And then Hawkinson. So he's ahead of like Kyle Pitts, right? And they both have pretty bad quarterbacks. Pitts has a better offensive system around him. But Hawkinson, as probably one of the only receivers on the Lions, has taken advantage of his opportunities. So there's a lot here. He's dropped the ball a couple more times than his contemporaries. He hasn't received as many targets, so the data is a little bit more noisy with him than it is with others, just because the Lions don't throw the ball all that much. But he's showcased some really good hands. He can win downfield. He's got a pretty high rate of deep downfield catches. And I was oh yeah, finally, the third component of that 538 score was the yards after catch score, and this is what was interesting to me. He has a very high yards after catch score. I talked to Reisman about that aspect of his game, and the impression I get from Hawkinson, the way that people talk about him in Detroit Lions circles, is that he is not as coordinated an athlete as you'd expect somebody of his athletic caliber to be. He had a really, really great athletic testing score, really just overshadowed by Noah Fant in the same class in school. But he's not as coordinated, so he falls down all the time, apparently, and loses a lot of potential yards after the catch. But he had a high yards after the catch score. And before I could even bring it up, Reisman was like, yeah, but every so often he just has these one or two catches where he just goes for 40 plus yards. But, from play to play, typically speaking, his ability to generate yards after the catch is actually not that good. So I find that, kind of fascinating that's something to kind of keep in mind, is that very often it doesn't seem like he's fighting through contact as a receiver. I don't know, but that's something that Lions people are apparently very familiar with.
So Irv Smith Jr. is out after the end of the year, right?
Yeah, Chris Thomason tweeted out, let me see if I can find the specific tweet. It was pretty fascinating. But, he asked somebody within the building, like, hey, is there a world in which Irv Smith continues to be a Viking after the season is over, right? Because it's a contract year for him. And actually on the most recent Football Machine, he was basically one of two people where we were talking about, they were in prove-it seasons, the other one being Garrett Bradbury, because they're about to hit a negotiating window for their contract. Let's see if you can find that Thomason tweet. Yeah, so he said, a source on the chances of tight end Irv Smith Jr. remaining with the Vikings next season following his suffering of a high ankle sprain and the acquisition of T.J. Hawkinson. He's a lame duck. Smith becomes a free agent next March. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like that's the end of Irv Smith in purple, which is a shame because he has been derailed by injuries, here and there. A lot of the injuries are very unrelated to each other. So it's sometimes, players will accrue multiple injuries and then won't get injured again. We were just talking about the Lions. A really good example of that is Matthew Stafford, who had been injured, I think 3 out of his first 4 years in the NFL, and then became a super durable guy for like the rest of his career. These things can sometimes happen. I don't know. It sounds like the Vikings might be a little bit frustrated with availability. And certainly this year when he was playing, he wasn't playing all that well, although you have to keep in mind that the biggest issue with him was drops, and the injury he suffered was a broken thumb. And I would imagine that those two things are related. So I don't know. But having a guy that you can just trust out in the field to catch the ball. And again, Hawkinson doesn't have out of all of the tight ends, on the market right now, or not on the market in the NFL right now, Hawkinson does not historically have, the world's best drop rate, but it's actually quite good compared to somebody like Irv Smith this year. So it's another thing to keep in mind is that this is a guy that you can trust, right? We saw Johnny Munt drop what could have been a touchdown pass. We saw Irv Smith drop what was a touchdown pass, or likely a touchdown pass. And just having a guy that's going to corral the ball in is just nice to have. So, yeah, I think that the Vikings are not interested in having a 2 tight end offense unless they really need to in the red zone. And that's just going to be kind of what the other tight ends in the roster are going to be there for. Johnny Munt is primarily billed by the Vikings as a blocking tight end. Ben Ellefson only knows blocking. It is his only life. And I think that that's going to be the way that the Vikings roll going forward, is that they're always going to have a couple of blocking tight ends, maybe a guy who can do a little bit of both, but a primary tight end that should be available to do anything. I think that's what they view Hawkinson as.
Well, the last thing I want to ask, we've got some questions that came in a way of like a mailbag about the trade, but the one question I want to ask is, do his strengths and Cousins' strengths match up at the tight end position?
I mean, if we're asking kind of like the way that Cousins needs a tight end to operate, in order to kind of maximize his skill set, it would probably be a tight end that has a good sense of route timing, that has a similar sense of how the field operates and how to change his routes based off of the leverage of the defense that he's watching, and somebody that can Um, Basically hear the calls, right? Like when Cousins makes an audible at the line of scrimmage, is the tight end going to be able to execute the second play or the third play that's in the audible? I know that sounds kind of like a really basic skill, but we have seen this be a problem in the past for the Vikings. So I'm going to bring it up. And then, is he somebody that Cousins is going to trust in a contested catch situation? One thing that we liked about the Kyle Rudolph Kirk Cousins connection, and one thing that was kind of a big part of Adam Thielen's success, right, when he was scoring a bunch of touchdowns, was that Cousins trusted him in contested catch situations. Something that takes sometimes quite a while for Cousins to do. I know that, after we watched the Case Keenum season where all he threw was contested catches to Diggs and Thielen and seeing them come up with it time and again, it was a little bit frustrating for Cousins to kind of wait a little bit longer for a guy to get open or to decline a pass that probably could have been a contested catch and not just an interception. Those kinds of things. It took a while for him to want to throw those contested catches again. And I think that Hawkinson has a history of winning a lot of these contested balls, and it's not like, Jared Goff is throwing the cleanest passes in the world. And I think that those match with what Cousins wants to do. Now, in terms of like matching the timing of the route and doing the precise thing that the playbook calls for, that's not something I can really speak to off the top of my head. It'd be something that I'd need either like a better film analyst like Nate Tice to do or some source to tell us about. But he does have a good sense of how to find open space on the field when it comes to having to adjust your routes on the fly. The issue is that he and Cousins have to be on the same page there, right? Because, Stephon Diggs was also very good at finding open space. But, if there's one kind of discordance that Diggs and Cousins had, and there's multiple, we know that, but one of the kind of few ways that, that Diggs Cousins connection wasn't working, and obviously it was working really well, but one of the few ways it wasn't was very often they had a very different sense of what to do with the route in order to find ways to get open. Now, obviously, Diggs and Allen are doing a really great job of being on the same page. It's not like one of them was wrong or anything like that. They just couldn't be consistently on the same page. So that's just going to take time. I think that's a really, in modern NFL offenses, that's the mark of a really good offense. Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes have an amazing sense of when the ball should arrive and where it should be off script, right? And so one of the things, actually, this was described in a recent episode of the Athletic podcast, the Athletic Football Show with Nate Tice and Robert Mays, is when you call a play that has, let's say, a corner route in it, right? And so the guy running the corner route, often from the slot, let's say it's tight end Travis Kelce, runs upfield about 17 to 22 yards and then angles about 30 to 45 degrees towards the sideline, right? That's a very precise way I just described it. It depends on the drop back, depends on your speed, etc. But you angle to a certain depth, turn up, and then as soon as you take about your second or third foot on that corner route after your break, right, after you start angling up, you begin to turn one way or the other based off of the leverage of your closest defender based on what you're feeling. You'll turn inside if the defender is above you, you'll turn outside if the defender's below you, and then that's where the ball should be, before you get to the sideline and get out of bounds. Often, somebody like a Travis Kelce, knowing what Patrick Mahomes wants to do, knowing what the defense is looking like, will begin turning as the route breaks, 2 or 3 steps before you'd expect it, and the ball will be right there in his hands. That kind of chemistry is really difficult to, create, and you just have to think the same way. Your brain just has to be on the same wavelength, and we don't know how that's going to turn out. So I think that on paper, I think Hawkinson does a lot of things that Cousins needs a tight end to do well, but many of the things that will really enable this offense to take off with somebody like Hawkinson as kind of a core component to that, that's just going to take time, and it's going to take, an answer to a question we never get the answer to unless they, take a swing and grab the guy. But because he's worked well with both Stafford and Goff to create these yards, as well as players like David Blau, right? Like, the Lions went through like 2, 3, like Tim Boyle, right? Like they went through a couple of backups and he was fine, right? So I just have a feeling that it's probably going to work out.
Well, let's get to some mailbag questions about the Hawkinson trade and a little bit about the rest of the trades. Nick Howard asks, why are people saying we paid too much for Hawkinson when it appears we only swapped draft positions? Also, what was your favorite trade of the day, and why was it the Jags trading for a player that is suspended for gambling against the Jags?
That just means that he's going to want it more. I don't like that. Of course, hey, I believed in this team so little that I thought you would lose to the Falcons of all teams, and I was right. Time to turn things around. That's how I'd sell it if I were him. No, I mean that was a great trade. I think also just because the uncertainty of that trade, like even aside from the fact that there's like a delicious irony in that. So Ridley gambled a lot on a lot of games against a lot of teams, never against the Falcons. But the one that he got caught for was specifically betting against the Jaguars in the Falcons-Jaguars game. So I find that one kind of funny. The one that triggered open the investigation and got a compliance team to notify the NFL. But I mean, the uncertainty of that one is just, I think, kind of cool because, there's conditions in the trade for, if he does not get reinstated for the season, then, this like second round pick becomes a fourth round pick or something like that. And if you, and then the next year, if he doesn't see the field, then this fourth round pick disappears. If he does see the field, it's a fourth round pick. If he sees the field for a certain number of snaps, it's a third round pick. And if you extend him, it's a second round pick. It's just a Matryoshka doll of conditions. I love it. And it's so uncertain, and who knows? But also, it'd be nice to get Trevor Lawrence a guy. So I like that one. So to answer the first question, why are people saying we paid too much for Hawkinson? I actually don't know because I haven't seen a ton of that. I've seen largely a positive reception to it. The only thing I can think of is the fact that you've only got 1 year of Hawkinson on his rookie contract. Then you've got the fifth-year option, and then you have to give him a deal. And you're probably going to give him a deal before that fifth-year option kicks in so you can kind of control what that cap hit looks like. So it might just be that you don't have that much player control at a reasonable price, and that is what a lot of these trades are working with because you're never trading for a player, right? Like if you traded a first-round pick for Bradley Chubb, that sounds great. But if you only have 1 year of control over him and you have to immediately extend him, now that first-round pick is beginning to look like, oh, I understand why you gave up the 20th pick in the draft for a guy who, went top 5 and deserved to go top 5 based off of his ability. And so you being able to get him at 20 seems great, but you only got 1 year of him, right? As opposed to, if you got 3 or 4 years of a player, right? Like that's why draft picks sometimes cost more than the player that gets picked there that gets traded 3 or 4 years later. So that's the only reason I can think of. Maybe it's because like, hey, he's not actually a good blocker. Take a look at his PFF grades, which again, I already said that I think there's some context for that. But yeah, for the most part, I'm seeing most people say that it was a pretty good trade for the Vikings. I think it was a decent trade for the Lions too. I don't think that it was a situation where you've got a winner and a loser. It's just both franchises are in a different spot. The Vikings were 6-1 and are precariously so. And so I think that it makes sense to try and add talent. Plus they just lost a player. To injured reserve. And so, they're attempting to make sure that they can control their path to the playoffs, to make sure they've got at least one, game at home, if not multiple, whereas the Lions are 1-6. It's just a different reality for them. So they can both win the trade based off of those parameters. But yeah, I haven't seen a ton of people say that the Vikings paid too much for Hawkinson, but maybe I just run in the wrong Twitter circles. Who knows?
There was something that was reported earlier today, and I can't remember the player that was they were trying to trade for, but the Rams attempted to make a play for someone and were told no because they were trying to ship out their first round pick in like 2027 because they don't have anything because that's how they built their Super Bowl team.
Yeah. Well,
like finally, you can't do this anymore. You don't have credit at this bank.
It's just, yeah. Your credit score is shot. It's tanked. We're not giving you any. We're not extending you lines of credit. There's only so many first round picks that we can produce before we're actually just printing money.
It was amazing, and like just reading that, I was like, yeah, it must have been Carolina or somebody who was like looking at it. It was
Carolina for Brian Burns.
That's what it was. Yeah, they're like, no, that doesn't help us. We don't. We would prefer to have a first round pick in the next 3 years and not 4 or 5.
Yeah, so like it was reported, what was like a week ago, that the Panthers had turned down a 2 first round picks. And everyone was like, wow, I can't believe you turned down 2 first round picks for Brian Burns. That's crazy. I mean, Burns is a good player, but that's nuts. And then either a bunch of people on Twitter or somebody, and then a bunch of people followed, were like, well, what if it was the Rams? What if it was whatever first round picks they have left, right? Which is definitely not this year. It could be next year, maybe the year after. And everyone was like, oh yeah, I can see why you wouldn't play that game. You were like if I were the Panthers, I would leak, hey, we got to offer 2 first round picks, and we said no.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You got to pay a lot. But everyone else was just like, well, hold on, let's first round picks could mean a lot in this conversation. It could mean quite a bit. So let's find out what that means. And it turns out they were right, that actually the Rams were the team that offered the 2 first round picks, and they were the least valuable first round picks that you could offer.
It's just a beautiful thing when comeuppance finally happens. Brad Smith asks, if the Vikings don't extend him, is the trade worth it? Also, is he in the Njoku range for salary?
I think he is, because he's performing like Njoku, at least as a receiver, and I think he's probably better than Njoku as a blocker if you kind of give them all the same blocking assignments and take a look at what they do. But yeah, I mean, I think that the trade is probably worth it because you have 2 years of control. If you don't extend it, because the Vikings are kind of in a win now window. I mean, like I don't know when the window ends, but they're certainly 6-1, right? And so a short-term injection of talent is good.
There was a tweet out there from, I think, the guy from KSTP, who said, you guys don't seem to understand, for anybody who's complaining about this trade, the division hasn't been this bad in decades. And the Vikings are attempting to make a real move here.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, if I'm going to criticize the Vikings for, playing sloppily in wins and not playing in a way that is sustainable, right? Whatever that means, and not putting opponents away and not reaching the potential that the offense has, and this and that, and saying like, hey, the defense is not going to always be there to give you a late game turnover. The special teams cannot produce muffed punts on a whim. They are relying on these low frequency fluke events in order to, win games. They need to find a way that is more consistent in winning. And this is exactly if I'm going to be consistent as somebody who commentates on the Vikings, which in fairness, I have no obligation to do. You're trapped in here with me. But if I am going to be consistent with that at all, it would be to praise the Vikings for making this kind of move. Now, it is still possible that they would pay too much, right? You can make this kind of move and it's the wrong thing, right? You can trade a first round pick for Sam Bradford. But I think that for the most part, we should err on the side of realizing the Vikings are 3.5 games ahead in the division. They are statistically likely a 500 team. If you run a bunch of models and see who the Vikings are, et cetera, they're probably a 500 team that won a couple of extra games. Why not move them out of that little 500 range, make them a 550 or 600 team, and get your team to be better so that when it comes time to the playoffs and they've got that home field advantage, they can take advantage of it, right? Like if it was Chris Long at KSTP or whoever it was, that's exactly the attitude, right? Is that like, yeah, okay, if you don't extend Hawkinson, certainly the value of those picks or the value of the trade changes because the picks probably assume that a little bit. One of the really great things about some of these trades is that you have an exclusive negotiating window. That is, like, no one else is allowed to negotiate with your player except you. You can negotiate with them at any time, right? That is valuable. There's a lot of value in that. And when you negotiate, when you're the only party in a negotiation, the price goes down, which is, worse for the player, right? But, the NFL was never about labor freedom. But it is better for the team, and they can, construct the contract however they want, and they can continue to be the only player in the market, the only team in the market for that player, and have some guarantees hashed out and stuff like that. So that's great. And if you don't take advantage of that, or if that's not, going to turn into anything for you, that sucks. You're not getting the full value of the trade. But there's still a lot of value because the Vikings are not as good as a 6-1 team should be. Why not try to make that a reality? I just feel like that makes sense to me, right? I don't know that a tight end or Hawkinson is the answer, right, completely, but it is a way to go in that direction, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Next question, Burrito Bill asks, does he have any experience playing right guard?
Probably. I mean, he did come from Iowa.
Yeah. Speaking on that, Kenneth Allen asks, does the fact that Hawkinson went to Iowa have any bearing on whether or not he'll play this week?
They raise him right in Iowa. He'll play.
Yeah. What does this mean, Beef Brewski? What does this mean for the long-term success of Nick Muse?
It's not looking good for our practice squad 7th round tight end from South Carolina.
It's unfortunate. I think is the best word to say. It's probably
his Instagram account will be as wonderful as ever, though.
Yeah. Well, at least he's got that going for him. Jack Rackham asks, is the Vikings' lack of a deep threat outside of Jefferson an issue, or does the Hawkinson addition offer enough quality targets so that such a robust deep attack isn't necessary?
I don't know that they don't really have they don't have like a Marvin Hall, right, that I just mentioned. They don't have, a Marquise Brown. I guess he just got injured, but they don't have like a Will Fuller or a John Ross. I keep on choosing bad deep threats for this example. I don't know. But they don't have a guy who's Tyreek Hill. Wow, why didn't I think of that guy? They don't have a guy whose primary method of winning is winning off of speed and catching 30-yard bombs or anything like that. But they do have guys that get open deep, right? I think even Adam Thielen, as much as he's kind of slowed down, is still getting open deep. Justin Jefferson, like the question already asked, is getting open deep. KJ Osborne, he won a game for the Vikings getting open deep. Mind you, that was more the Lions' fault than anything else. But he's getting open deep, and he's a relatively fast player, even if he only ran like a 4.5 or something like that. So yeah, they don't have an Amir Smith-Marset, right? But I don't know that they don't get to win deep. Certainly, you alter the geometry of opposing defenses if you've got a guy who's running a 4.2, right? Like a Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle is absolutely going to change, what defenses are allowed to do basically in terms of the way that they run their coverages. And, you get robbed of a couple of opportunities that way. But at the same time, now you've got a red zone threat in a way that you didn't have before, especially if Thielen's not going to be that red zone threat. Irv Smith, for, as much potential as he had, I never considered him a potential red zone threat, even though he's a tight end, because he's like 6'2", right? And he doesn't show and by the way, Adam Thielen is like shorter than that. You can be a red zone threat without it. But the way that Irv Smith would win in the red zone will be with an understanding of space and route running, which is not what he has. He's not winning a bunch of contested catches for balls thrown, 7 feet high, right? That was a Kyle Rudolph kind of gig. Well, now you've got TJ Hawkinson that does that. So you don't have every element of an offense, but very few offenses have every element. In fact, some of the best offenses we've seen, like the 50 touchdown offense from Peyton Manning, they didn't have every element, right? Like Eric Decker was a red zone threat, but they didn't, Demaryius Thomas was a bit of a deep threat, but they didn't really have every element. Like they didn't have outside of the slot a guy that was going to run they had Wes Welker, but they didn't have a guy that was going to run your intermediate routes with a ton of precision, right? Like they didn't have that guy. They didn't have a guy with a great understanding of space between the 20s, right? But they scored 50 passing touchdowns. You don't need to have every kind of guy on your offense. And I think in this case, this is kind of, the Vikings have a lot of skills and a lot of guys that understand, how to get open, and they're not going to get open in every possible way, but they're going to get open in a lot of ways, and you can still throw deep.
Finally, on this particular topic, was it a mistake not making a move for a cornerback?
It depends on what cornerbacks were available and how much they cost, right? Like, that's the thing, right? Like, we're asking the Vikings why they didn't buy something without knowing the price. And to some extent, that's fair, right? The Vikings are lacking in cornerbacks, and if there are cornerbacks on the market, it would be wise to find a way to acquire one of those. But I don't know, because maybe they could have gotten Rashad Fenton for a 7th rounder. I thought that would have been a phenomenal move. But we have to figure out kind of what the cap situation is, right? The Vikings have the lowest amount of cap room in the NFL. We have to figure out, whether or not Fenton would have wanted to sign a long-term extension with Minnesota. Maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know. I guess I would err on the side of saying, yeah, but I don't want to be too harsh in that criticism, right? Like, I think that probably the premise of the question is correct, but I don't want to, go on hard, because trades are so rare in the NFL anyway, right? Except, I guess, this year, that it is hard for me to harangue a team for not making a trade. I can only really get into whether or not a team made a good trade or a bad trade, but the lack of a trade is a difficult one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if they traded for Rashad Fenton, that would have been a really great element of the trade window. I don't know, yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that the Vikings didn't solve as many problems as they could have potentially solved, and that leaves them open to criticism. But it's not something I'm gonna you know drill down on.
It's worth noting that Green Bay didn't do anything in the way of a trade at the end of the window here, but the Bears did. The Bears traded away two defenders and then picked up a wide receiver. I'm still scratching my head a bit about that.
Yeah, so they offloaded Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn. Quinn was an expensive cap hit. He was not producing this year like he did last year. Roquan Smith was not in a good negotiating posture with the Bears. They were at an impasse in terms of how to extend him, and it was really difficult for the Bears to strike a long term deal. So they just offloaded him. And they're not in a win now window. I think the thing with Claypool though is you get 2 years to evaluate him, and you get a guy that might help you evaluate Justin Fields. So I think all three moves that the Bears made are for the future, right? Robert Quinn is not going to be any element of the Bears' plans 3 years down the road. Chase Claypool might be. Maybe we'll find out. Roquan Smith wasn't going to be because he wasn't going to sign the contract, but the guys that they draft using those picks are. So I think all of these are kind of consistent. What's interesting is that the Packers apparently also offered a second round pick for Chase Claypool. And, the Steelers said, no, the Bears are going to lose more games than you. And so we're going to get a better second round pick, which fantastic.
Are they really going to lose more games than the Bears? Like the Packers play the Lions this weekend, and that is closer than it should be.
Yeah, we don't know that for a fact. The Steelers had to make a choice, right? They had to project who was going to lose more games, and the Steelers, decided the Bears seem more likely to us to lose games. It's funny because the Steelers are not known as a particularly analytical team. I think every team in the NFL now does have an analytics staff, but they do different things. Some only do, business operation type stuff to maximize ticket sales. And so they have an analytics department, but doesn't help them in terms of, evaluating football players. Some of them only do stuff like free agency. Some of them only do stuff like the draft. Some of them only do stuff like injury management, right? There's a ton of different ways that analytics departments interact with the operation of a football team, and not all of them help you with say trying to figure out if a trade is a good idea or not. I'm curious how the Steelers came to this conclusion, whether or not they just kind of glanced at the Packers and the Bears and were like, yeah, all right, we get the vibe. The Bears are going to lose more games. Or if they, ask somebody in their analytics department to say, hey, what do you think is more likely? Do you think the Bears are going to lose more games? Who's going to have a higher draft pick here? That would have been kind of interesting, but the Steelers are not known to be that kind of organization. Maybe I'm wrong. And they just did a vibe check and we're like, I don't know. We like the Packers vibe more, so we're not going to give them the guy because we're going to get more out of a team with bad vibes. The Packers stood. So in my piece on winners and losers in the NFL trade window, which I got called a homer for because I had mentioned that the Vikings won, and now I'm getting kind of like how frustrating it is to be a national writer because like I can't only talk about 31 teams. I have to talk about the Vikings in some way. But I've never been called a homer for the Vikings when I actually covered the team. Right? So,
I believe a hater was the term that people were using.
It came up a lot, yeah. But I called the Vikings a winner, not only because the Hawkinson trade helped them, but because the Packers did not get any better, the Lions got worse, and the Bears, on balance, got worse. Right? And it's like, well, okay. So, the Vikings had like a 95% chance or whatever to win the division because they're 3.5 games ahead of the Packers, right? And now the division got weaker. Fantastic. Of course they won the trade window because the Packers didn't do anything. Of course they won the trade window because in getting better, the Lions got worse. Of course they won the trade window because now the Bears don't have two of the best players on the only unit they have that's worth anything, right? So, yeah, I mean, the Vikings are still going to lose to the Bears because that's, kind of how history works. But, for the most part, it's helpful that the Bears got worse. So, yeah, I mean, the Vikings definitely won the trade window. And part of that was because the Packers stood pat while they had a bunch of holes. And I don't know if the Packers are, committing to the idea that they're no longer a good team and I doubt it because they were in those trade negotiations. They also were in talks with the Texans for Brandon Cooks, but they did not offer enough. And the Texans were like, look, if we give you Brandon Cooks on a bad deal, that is better than nothing for right now. But down the road, people are going to remember our bad trade deals and only accept us offering players at a discount. So we're going to lose on Brandon Cooks here, and we're going to win later on down the road in trade negotiations. And the Packers are like, okay, well, I don't really care about all of that. I guess we're just not going to get Brandon Cooks, right? So, the Packers tried to get a receiver, right? They tried to get a receiver and they couldn't, and that's good for the Vikings.
I enjoyed that of all the quotes that came out from the McAfee interview today with Rodgers. He said that he was hoping that he'd have some news to talk about while they were recording, and then nothing happened.
This little bee. Oh my God. He is so petty.
Nothing happened. It's glorious. Did I tell you I basically had a barbecue on Sunday based entirely on the fact that we were going to watch Aaron Rodgers just get beaten up and like just destroyed on national TV? It was glorious. Like cheers were had. It was fantastic. I will absolutely take the whole, Rodgers getting beaten up on national TV anytime I can. It's perfect. Before we get into the Cardinals review, we'd just like to just quick mention the passing of Adam Zimmer. This was reported this morning, and it was verified through all the appropriate channels that Adam Zimmer, former defensive coordinator for the Vikings, and was a consultant for the Bengals, ended up passing away here in the last day or so. Obviously, our thoughts are with Mike Zimmer and his family on this, but this was really unfortunate, and a number of players have said condolences and all that. But there's unfortunately, and one of the reasons I'm just mentioning this briefly is because there's not a lot of details on this, other than the Minneapolis PD saying that the death was not listed as suspicious and that he was 38 years old.
Yeah, there's not much to add here in terms of details. It is unusual, right, for someone who's 38 to pass away suddenly like that, and so we're inherently going to be curious as to why it occurred. But we don't have a right to that information, and that's fine. I was asked earlier today on a radio appearance, kind of if I have any memories of Adam Zimmer. And of course, I didn't interact with him very much. At first, he was a linebackers coach, and then he was the co-defensive coordinator with Andre Patterson. But the thing that kind of stood out to me before we kind of move on to the next segment is Adam Zimmer was very much not like his father in that he didn't really want to be combative with the media. He was not, when he started out as the defensive coordinator, particularly great at articulating his thoughts on camera or trying to get across everything that he wanted to say. But he's very persistent in attempting to kind of communicate those things. But by the end, over the course of basically 1 year, he got much, much better at it. He got much better at making sure that he communicated everything that he wanted to communicate and making sure that the media understood kind of what he was trying to get across. And I think the thing that really strikes me about that is that he was swimming, right? Because he was given a really difficult job, and it was a year that it was really difficult to be a defensive coordinator because of the way the Vikings were performing. And the media interaction stuff is not a critical part of his performance, but he knew that he wasn't great at it. He didn't have to become better at it, and he still took time to make sure that he got better at it, because if there's something that you're bad at and it's not important, it's very easy for you to not try to improve. But there was something that told him that he needed to find ways to get better in every aspect of the way that he was a coach, whether that meant getting players in the right spots or making sure that the media understood what he was doing. And it was very clear that he put in a lot of effort. And by the end, he was actually our favorite person to talk to when we had availability, because he was so forthcoming without compromising anything that the team needed in terms of like intelligence. But he's so forthcoming and giving us information that we wanted to know to be able to tell better stories without beating down players, without causing drama, and without making it difficult for the other coaches on the staff. And so that was something that I remembered before the Vikings cleaned house. And that was actually my first thought when I heard the news, is that you don't often see somebody put in that much of a concerted effort to interact better with you when they don't know you, and it's not important that they interact better with you. So those are my thoughts. I didn't know him all that well. From all accounts, he was a fantastic person, and my thoughts are with his family.
Well, we do have a game to review. The Vikings were successful and knocked off the Cardinals. This was not a offensive... the second half was not some sort of offensive juggernaut that went in and destroyed the Cardinals. The Cardinals had every opportunity to come back and win this thing. And of all things, the defense is what stood strong.
Yeah, I don't know if the defense just suddenly got a lot better, or if it was that there were a number of former Cardinals on the defense that decided that they weren't going to get beaten by the Cardinals. We saw a couple of stories come out after the game, especially with regards to Patrick Peterson, about how the Cardinals treated.
Big chips on shoulders.
A lot of chips, and honestly, the stories, which I'll link. Honestly, the stories were kind of egregious. Like, I can't believe they treated Patrick Peterson like that. But yeah, it was like they would. So people would email the GM or the owner or the head coach, which I don't know why you'd ever email an owner, but fine, whatever, do what you want. Actually, no, don't do that. That's harassment. Don't do it. But they would email their thought, oh, Patrick Peterson is playing poorly. Oh my God. And they would print out the emails and leave it at his chair at his locker. And why? Why would you do that? That's
Seems
crazy.
Like a bizarre motivational technique.
Yeah, but it's like the guy clearly, first of all, he's 30. He's your team captain. He doesn't he'll find bad press if he wants to and motivate himself. You just let him do that. It's very clear he didn't like it, right? And so just listen to your team captain on this. This is just crazy to me. Anyway, Peterson had the game of his life. It felt like watching, aside from the fact that he was playing off coverage instead of press coverage, it felt like watching the old Patrick Peterson. It was really cool because he was playing pitch perfect technique. He was doing a great job on targeted passes, got his hands on balls, almost got an interception. No, he actually did get an interception, didn't he? Absolutely phenomenal game from him. Really good play from Jordan Hicks. I thought that obviously Za'Darius Smith had a really fantastic game. Eric Kendricks had a really great game. A lot of the individual players on the defense did really fantastically. Cameron Dantzler didn't. I would probably blame the Vikings more than Dantzler for that. But, at some point you have to say, hey, this player's just not as good as DeAndre Hopkins. And they know that and are taking advantage of that fact. But for the most part, really great performances. I thought Daniel Hunter played pretty well. I know his PFF grade wasn't great, but I thought Hunter played pretty well. It's interesting because we come out of these reviews and very often I say, hey, Hunter's PFF grade wasn't great, but I thought he played well. But his overall PFF score is actually pretty high for a guy without that many pressures. So I don't really know kind of what the normalization system is for how they're deciding these grades. But, the game grades, I'm not, vibing with a ton. But the season grade kind of matches my intuition. It's a very weird circumstance because he's 13th among edge defenders with at least 50% of snaps. In PFF grade. He's right behind Khalil Mack and right ahead of Rashawn Gary, which based off of the number of sacks, the number of pressures, you wouldn't expect. Anyway, Hunter had, I thought, a pretty good game. There was unfortunate news about Irv Smith. There's unfortunate news about Dalvin Tomlinson. But yeah, the defense did a pretty good job of understanding, hey, Kyler Murray's going to do this. He's going to do this, and we've got to take them away. And in the first half, they didn't take away some of what Kyler Murray does well. In the second half, they absolutely did that, which was a nice change of pace because the Vikings' second half defense has not been extraordinary this year.
Yeah, it's very much been the opposite. People have used the term garbage fire to describe how bad the defense has been. Oh, we've heard worse. We've heard much worse, but it's been bad. So it was nice to see the defense actually be working. First half, the offense looked great. Dalvin Cook was moving at just about 100 yards by the end of the first half. Justin Jefferson catching balls, looking great. Fun stat of the day: Justin Jefferson has not had a receiving touchdown since week 1.
Which is why he got so close in the Cardinals. He's
really
so
did.
Close. But yeah, it was just funny because his week 1, he had 2 touchdowns in week 1, right?
Yes.
One of those was, I'm sure both of them were fantastic, but the one I remember was the one where he should have been out at the 5-yard line, and he somehow just like Michael Jordan at the end of Space Jam. Like the arm stretch out. He somehow both powered through and had his arm stretch out, and he was able to get that touchdown. It was really fantastic. And you think, wow, that's going to translate. Yeah, I guess not.
It was the fantasy game that like you hear about the face that sent 1,000 ships or something like that. That was the fantasy game that sent 1,000 fantasy trades. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Have to get him in.
Like, wow, if he's going to keep doing that, yeah. Because the thing last year was that he was kind of an okay to below average touchdown generator. Because Adam Thielen was stealing all his touchdowns. And I guess we're at the same spot. Justin Jefferson has very, very, very few weaknesses, but production in the red zone is kind of one of them. Yeah, he had 98 yards, no touchdown. I don't know. Jefferson had a really good game, but the Vikings did a much better job of using their complementary receivers. You didn't get much out of KJ Osborne, of course, except a touchdown. But, Thielen got 60-plus yards. Irv Smith, before he had to leave, got 25-plus yards. Dalvin Cook got 30 yards as a receiver. Still not a remarkably diverse passing game. Justin Jefferson almost accounted for 50% of yards, but more diverse passing game than some of the other games that we've seen, which is going to be important going forward.
All right, I'm going to bring it up. Let's break it down. The Kirk Cousins scramble for the touchdown. Was it more or less awkward, slower or faster than that touchdown run that we remember from Peyton Manning right before he retired?
Oh, okay. Is this the Peyton Manning one? I'm trying to remember. Was it a bootleg keeper?
Yes.
If I remember. Yeah. That one was so slow and so comical.
He was moving in quicksand.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say he was moving through concrete. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, obviously the only reason it worked is because you would never do that with Peyton Manning. That's insane.
Never once.
And Peyton Manning was like, I've got an idea.
Hey, here's something here's something that wouldn't let me do in Indy. But basically, since I run the show here in Denver.
No, this one was a good deal more athletic. Low bar, but a good deal more athletic. He beat someone to the corner. Kirk Cousins beat someone to the corner.
Frick yeah. That was so like... there are a few moments in life where you just sit there like, did that really just happen? Did Kirk Cousins take someone to the corner? Wow, he's earning his chain today.
Exactly. Yeah. The only regret was that this is a home game, so he couldn't fly home with the chain.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's funny. Like you get to the point. So Cousins had, I think, 4 rushing attempts. So he got. Not a ton of yardage outside of the 17-yard run, but it was generally good. The fact that he had a couple of these rush attempts. But the funny thing is, one of the biggest criticisms of Kirk Cousins coming out of this game is on third down when he had a wide open field in front of him and he didn't run for it.
Exactly.
Right? Like how often we're like, Cousins, why didn't you run for
it? Not a sentence that should exist, but here we are.
Yeah, look, you've decided who you are today. Be that guy.
You've decided you want to be. I mean, I wouldn't even put him as like the white Lamar Jackson. I like he's a whiter version of Joe Burrow. Like
well, both of them wear chains after wins, but one of them wears a little bit more naturally. Yeah, I agree.
Because I wasn't going to put Josh Allen in that. No, we're not.
No.
That's not.
I was thinking like the comparison that came to my head was a goofier Steve Young, right? Like,
boy, that's a description.
I think it works. As a runner.
It was amazing to watch. I was pleased to see Kirk Cousins run in for a touchdown. I was incensed that he didn't just take 3 steps forward and get a first down, and instead the ball soared over, I believe it was Justin Jefferson's head.
It was Jefferson, yeah.
Just unfortunate. But fun game. The Vikings were able to be successful, and of all dumb things that we have to talk about, is that this game should not have been this close. And I'm pointing to the kicking as the reason why.
Yeah, that is pretty fair. So we come out of a lot of these games. So Greg Joseph's field goals, he's only missed 50+ yard field goals, but like it's like 5 misses at this point. And every time a kicker misses a 50-yard field goal, and we talk about it after the game, one of the things I say is like, hey, I don't want to knock a kicker too much for missing a 50-yard field goal. Those things are definitely not automatic. It makes sense to miss those from time to time. In individual games, it makes sense to hold that stance, but 1 of 6, that's an issue. And 2 of them have been blocked, but I think both blocks are probably his fault. So one of the issues with long field goals is not that it's difficult to kick that far. Most kickers can kick much further than 60 yards for field goal attempts, right? The issue is to get the right trajectory to be able to get over the opposing line and then still have the ability to get those 50 yards and be accurate all at once, right? Like that's the problem, right? A lot of these kickers, if you ask them to kick as far as possible, could kick a line drive even maybe 70 yards, right? But that's not the goal. The goal is to make a field goal. There's someone stopping you from doing that, which is why the fair catch kick needs to happen more often because you don't have that issue. And that's what makes Justin Tucker's like game-winning field, like the record-setting field goal against the Lions, like so incredible. It's like, yeah, actually, he could just do it. But it's happened often enough. And in this case, his trajectory was too low. He nailed the guy in the face.
In the face, right square in the face.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that, of course, until the replay, right? And I don't think the broadcasters realized it either because they were talking about how the guy had his hands outstretched and how it was great to have his hands in the right position. And then the guy gets booted in the face.
And then they did the replay twice and went, wait, that hit the dude in the face.
But yeah, and he also missed an extra point on top of that. And if he hadn't missed that extra point, it would have been a 9-point game and therefore would not count in the history of Vikings in one-score games.
And it might have swung at least one game in the North Code Hell Leagues, which I enjoyed that you pimped that out on the football party on the Halloween episode. I forget it was the fellow who writes for the Vikings for The Athletic. I'm willing to bet that might have been the first time that someone had mentioned the rules to it because he visibly was like shaking laughing at that.
I did actually at the beginning of the season tell Alec Lewis about this league, but he must have just forgotten completely when I brought it up. Also, I don't think I told him about the Hell League. So,
okay.
You know.
Between that and Luke Braun just dying while you were wearing the mask during the football party. If you haven't seen, like, I realize I'm talking about another podcast here. It's worth watching the football party Halloween episode on YouTube just to see how flustered Luke Braun is by a Reef wearing the Luke Braun mask.
I don't know, what he thought was he was like, I should have seen this coming, and it's like, yeah, man, we've been basically telling you it was going to happen for days.
We telegraphed it, and I posted in the Discord my reaction to you wearing the mask. It's like, oh God, what do I have to pay to make this go away? Is it from an ad read? What do I have to do? God. Anyway, point being, out of that is that was funny, but yeah, it's odd that this is continuing to happen, and at some point the Vikings have to admit that they have a Greg Joseph problem. We were told in the beginning of the year this was, it looked like, he was going to have the best season of his career. This is the Vikings are winning some of these games by the skin of their teeth and all, but at some point this is going to be the problem.
Yeah, well, if the Vikings are consistently in one-score games because their kicker can't, hit long field goals, the reality of the modern NFL is that you need to hit a good chunk of those 50 plusers, right? Like, 10 years ago, if you're not great at hitting 50-yard field goals, I think you could probably eke out, probably not a well-paying contract, but you could eke out, a season or two with the team, just kind of hitting those 40 and under, and then maybe, gamely trying a 50 pluser at the end of a game. But yeah, I mean, kickers can kick further now, right? They can kick more accurately. And so if your guy is only 1 for 6 from 50 plus, yeah, that is more understandable than missing those ones from 40 or 30. But there are fewer kicks from 40 or 30 nowadays because that's go for it territory on fourth down. And teams trust their kickers more from 50 plus. And so if it is like 4th and 17 from the 35, they're not going to go for it. And they're almost certainly not going to punt it, at least today, right? They're going to try to get you to kick it. And if you can't kick that, what would that be, a 53-yard field goal? If you can't kick that, you're not an NFL kicker. And he seemingly cannot kick that. So that is a Greg Joseph problem. The good news about the modern NFL is that, at least in the context of the Vikings discussion, is the kicker is less valuable, right? Just because there's fewer kicks between 30 and 40. But you're still going to be asked to kick some game winners and stuff like that. And if you can't do that, that's a huge issue, and they need to confront that problem.
It's funny that you mentioned that they mean less. They're less important. But those who follow the curse that is the Minnesota Vikings,
they will always be important.
It's going to happen. It's unfortunate, but it's going to happen. Is there anything that we should that like else needs to be covered from the game? I realize it's a couple days out. Normally we'd go a little bit longer on the game, but we've got some mailbag stuff to go into. So, is there anything that we're missing as far as the game is concerned? I mean, Patrick Peterson played fantastic. The offensive line didn't look great. What do we got?
The offensive line didn't look great. So actually, the one thing I did want to mention is that Christian Darrisaw looked like an elite player. Not like a good player, but like an elite player. I mentioned on the show a couple of times now that they're using Darrisaw a little bit differently than other tackles are often used. They're putting him on an island and sliding protection away from him. They're giving him more space. The splits between him and the rest of the offensive line are larger than the splits between the rest of the offensive linemen amongst each other. And by that, I mean where their feet are and where their bodies are. And so their feet, for most offensive linemen in the Viking scheme, are about 6 inches from each other, right? And so, one offensive lineman's right foot is 6 inches away from the other offensive lineman's left foot. And Darrisaw, sometimes it feels like he's a full yard away. He's probably, 2 feet at most, but he is split out from the rest of the offensive line so he can take on these speed rushers, and they trust his athleticism to cover the inside rusher, but they're not giving him help, right? They're absolutely not going to give him any help, and they don't need to. And that frees up a lot of the rest of that offense. We saw that in this game. He's doing a really fantastic job, and he is probably entering that territory of being a really high level, which is actually not something I anticipated. I thought that kind of the range of outcomes for Darrisaw was, at the low end, a below average guy, and at the high end, a very good player, right? I didn't expect him to kind of enter that elite range, that elite territory. Like a Tristan Wirfs, right? And it very much seems like he's on that trajectory right now, which is really cool to see. So I did want to add that we're getting more of that. Unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit less from Brian O'Neill, that we expected at this point in his career. And so if you can get them together at the level that Brian O'Neill was maybe 2-3 years ago, you'll have the best tackle duo in the league. Like the best, right? Like in the way that the Saints did a couple of years ago. And so that's really cool. So I wanted to add that in there as one of my observations. I did want to add, of course, that Kirk Cousins had some really great moments, and sometimes it's difficult to criticize a guy for putting up 34 points, leading 5 different touchdown drives. But I still want to see a more complete game from him. He has not had a game this year that's been as good as some of his better games from last year. Of course, that was a worse team, but there's still more, I think, to unpack with Cousins, and we saw that in this game as well. I don't know if we're going to reach it this year, but if the Vikings are going to avoid the thing I'm talking about sustainability, Cousins needs to be better than he was in this game, and this was one of his better games.
It was, even as like the team, it felt like a couple of things were clicking that were not clicking in the previous games outside of Green Bay. Like this seemed like, and this was off a bye. This seemed like...
Which has not historically been the Vikings' forte in the previous regime.
Precisely. Like, this was off of a bye. It seemed like, and we've said on the show that if they get a couple things together, this can be a dangerous team. Like this, they have moments of like doing really, really well. First half offense here, Cousins was scoring at will, like was doing really, really well out there. But, ended up slowing down and making a couple of mistakes, and in the second half ended up getting stopped a couple of times that were kind of questionable as to why they were doing that. But
Right.
but still, like this team has moments of being dangerous, and it's worth pointing out that they're still getting better.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, the thing about like say for example the Giants who are like in a kind of a similar category as being unsustainable. They just lost this weekend, that means my takes are correct. Um is that you can't really see the Giants becoming that high level team that the record purports them to be, right? They just simply do not have enough talent on offense and defense, even if, and it very much seems like this is the case, even if Daniel Jones is getting a lot better under Brian Dable. And I think that he is, right? But you just can't see it because the team's not there. For the Vikings, like the rocket ship is there. Like we can see it. They just have to fuel it up, right? And it's getting frustrating not seeing them do that because we know what it looks like when they're playing well. We just need it to happen more consistently. And this is one final note before we get to the mailbag. The Bills-Packers game, I think, exemplifies what it would be nice for the Vikings to become. I don't think they can do that this year. The Bills are way too talented to be a comparison. But maybe next year, if you get a bunch of really great development from, like let's say Lewis Cine comes back from injury, let's say Andrew Booth becomes the guy that you want him to be. It is possible. I don't know. The Vikings might have to make some moves in free agency. But the Bills against the Packers played sloppily. They played out of sync. They played not as well as they can. And they boat raced the Packers, right? Like they hit the spread in the first quarter and never looked back. The Packers got back into the spread with a late fourth quarter touchdown with about 6 minutes remaining, right? Like the Packers were never in the game. The closest they got was an interception. The next play the Packers threw was an interception to give the ball back. Like the Bills crushed them on a bad day, right? That's what it looks like when you've got a team that is so on point, that knows what it wants to do, and then does it, right? The Vikings kind of know what they want to do from down to down, but they certainly don't always do it, right? Like there's some drives where they string it together and you're like, wow, this offense is unstoppable, right? You double Justin Jefferson. Well, now Adam Thielen is open, right? Now you've got Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson covered up with your, two high safeties where you can throw it underneath to Devin Cook. He's going to get like 30 yards a yak. There's nothing you can do, right? But that's just not who the Vikings are consistently. When they have a bad day, they're going to lose. When the Bills have a bad day, they beat the Packers by 10 points, right? And so that's like kind of the direction you want to push the Vikings in. And it's unfortunate or unfair in a way because the expectation for me for the Vikings is that they be a 10-win team, right? They almost certainly, I shouldn't say they will, but they almost certainly are on that path, right? They're almost certainly going to be a 10-win team. They're going to exceed my preseason expectations. Power to them. But if they want to live up to the 6-1 record, they need to get closer to, when the Bills have a bad day or when the Chiefs have a bad day, they win by double digits, right? And when the Vikings have a bad day, right now, they lose.
It was amazing to watch, the Bills be unable to stop the run at all. And those injuries in the Bills defense are starting to add up. They're not crippling them yet, but they are starting to add up. But watching the Packers, like even Mike realized the context of this, but I had even tweeted that Mike Zimmer would have even thought that that the Packers were running too much. Like it didn't make any sense, whatever the hell like game plan the Packers had. But the Packers were being successful running the ball down the Bills' throat. And it makes me wonder what it's going to look like in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that, right? Like, if the Bills cannot contain that element of their defense, if they cannot, more effectively stop the run, I mean, the Vikings should do that because the Bills are getting Tre'Davious White back. They just activated him, right? They've got Kyrie Elam, they've got Christian Benford. Actually, I think Benford is injured, but they've got a really good secondary that is missing. I think Micah Hyde, but it still is Jordan Poyer. They just traded for a safety. I don't know if he's going to start, but they've got a good secondary. I would not want to test a Tre'Davious White coming off of injury. I know that he'll be lined up against Justin Jefferson. I did say that Justin Jefferson is better than any cornerback individually, one-on-one in the league. Tre'Davious White has the potential to be close. I don't know. But if the Bills can only rely on Matt Milano and only Matt Milano to stop the run, if Von Miller is not going to be interested in stopping the run, if Ed Oliver is going to be more of a pass rusher than a run stuffer, which is kind of unusual given his profile, run the ball, right? Just get rid of Matt Milano and run the ball. But yeah, that secondary is going to be really, really tough to test. And I'm really curious if the Bills are going to continue to be kind of weak against the run.
It's worth pointing out, of course, the Vikings are playing the Washington Commanders here this weekend, and we can't overlook the Commanders and just look toward that Bills matchup. But you'll get sniped or something terrible will happen on the Commanders field. That said, it's worth mentioning that this is on the horizon and could be an interesting game. There's a lot of Vikings fans, including myself, who are debating just how all in they want to be this year. And that Bills game is looking like the canary. It's like, this is it. Yeah. This is how far we're gonna go. Let's go into the mailbag. We got some great stuff in here. The Mond Pond, and I refuse to say the name of the actual name of the account, says, now that we have CJ, DJ, JJ, KJ, and now TJ, should we attempt to collect AJ through ZJ? How does the Vikings not have an AJ this year?
Yeah, how do they not have an AJ? That's a great question. There's a lot of AJs in the league. And the Vikings previously had an AJ and AJ Jefferson, but his time has long been past. I think they should. I think you get AJ through CJ. It's 26 players. You got 53 on a roster. Do it.
Yep, it's time. Maybe we can get a kicker somewhere in there. Be great. Brian Jellerson asks, is there an argument that Cousins made the right decision throwing to Justin Jefferson instead of running that 2 steps for the first down? I can see the idea, but I feel more frustrated that he didn't just run for it as opposed to having a terrible pass.
So I like throwing it deep on 3rd and 1, which is basically what this was, except it wasn't a play call. It was a mid-play decision. I like taking those chances because the risk reward, the general, unless it's you're winning and all you need to do is retain possession, that kind of thing. The risk reward of that is really positive for the offense. Just generally speaking, it's better for the offense to do something like that historically, right? Because you reduce your risk of a first down, but you massively increase your risk of a touchdown on the same drive, and that's worth it to me. But I think just in this case, you're running to your weaker side as a thrower. You don't throw as well when you're running to your left and to your right. The window is not phenomenal. Justin Jefferson is wide open in that no one is near him, but you still have to thread it over some guys. And it's right there. One of the reasons running the ball down the middle on 3rd and 1 is not great is because it's not automatic, right? If you guarantee a first down, that's a little bit different than before the play deciding whether or not you want to maximize your touchdown probability and minimize your first down probability, right? This is different. The probability of a touchdown is basically 0, right? Because Jefferson's going to be tackled there. It's a big play. It's going to increase your odds of a touchdown on the drive. But the possibility of a first down is nearly 100%. Just run the ball, man. I think it was a understandable decision, but I think it was a bad one. I get it. I don't want to knock him too much for it. The bigger issue, of course, was that the throw was bad, right? If you can disaggregate the throw from the decision, and of course, part of the decision-making process is understanding that you're running to your weak side and making the throw more likely to be inaccurate. If you could disaggregate that, the throw was the biggest problem. But yeah, he should have run it.
Yeah, it's bad. Roundy Mass asks, when is Kevin O'Connell going to finally unleash the Kirk Cousins dual threat quarterback and design our offense around what Kirk does best, being a running QB?
Man, I just think that, when you've got an old school coach like Kevin O'Connell, who's an old school offensive coordinator, you're just not going to get these radical ideas that include quarterback runs. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's despite running a 4.3 at the combine, something Kirk Cousins definitely did, despite demonstrating his ability.
It was a 5.7, wasn't it? You talk. I'm gonna Google.
Okay, it was faster than Tom Brady. That's all I'll say. Actually, I don't know if he ran, But yeah, I no, I don't think they're going to put the read option in there. Although, I mean, like sometimes you don't need a guy like that. Like Nick Foles ran the read option with Chip Kelly, and it worked. And I'm really confident that Nick Foles is a slower running quarterback than Kirk Cousins. The read option where you only pull it in the most extreme circumstances is a fun play. We just mentioned it with basically Peyton Manning, except it was just a keeper, not a read option. Yeah, you could throw it, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Kirk Cousins.
Did you find out his 40 time?
40 time. 4.93.
Hey, that's Jameis Winston stuff right there. Look at that.
Yes. Famous.
Man, that is...
That's unfortunate.
Rough.
Also, Diet Coke Enjoyer asks, now that Kirk Cousins has proven to be the fastest QB in the league, one for one trade for Lamar, who says no?
Hey, I think both parties would say yes. I mean, Lamar's having difficulty with the contract situation in Baltimore, right? And Baltimore just absorbed a new player who represents himself instead of working through an agent, Roquan Smith. Hey, get the headache off your hands, Baltimore.
Yep, it's
Make the call.
Yeah, everyone wins in this trade because they clearly don't want to pay Lamar Jackson, and Kirk has experience in the Maryland area. Maybe he's enjoyed his time there, but would just like to enjoy it minus the Dan Snyder interactions.
Yeah, see, perfect. It's getting the better side of the Atlantic Seaboard, I think.
Yes, that. There was an interview the other day, or say interview. There was a that Dan Snyder piece that came out, and the governor of Maryland had some comments about the location of the new stadium for the Washington football team, and he had said a couple of things like, we had a spot we thought that was going to work for us and everything up in Maryland, but they then decided to up and go down to Virginia. And when asked for comment on a number of the scandals regarding Dan Snyder, the governor of Maryland proceeded to say, I don't know much about that. I'm a Ravens fan. It's like, you know what?
Brutal.
No, nothing you could have said would have been better than that. So I want to congratulate you.
Phenomenal.
That is some fine politicking. Diet Coke Enjoyer also asks, in honor of two wonderful rookie starters, would you rather have a punter that can kick 80 yards, but half the time gets 20 net yards, or an amazing run blocking right guard that loses corporeal form on passing downs?
Like he just vanishes into the ether when it's a pass?
Basically, yes.
So two reasons I take the punter. One, pass blocking is in fact very important. Two, that's got to be like a tell, right? Like the defense will pick up that the right guard has disappeared and they know it's a pass play. Like they just key in on that for play action and they won't bite on play action. That's important too. If you're going to eliminate your play action possibility, that's rough. But yeah, I think the primary issue is that pass blocking is important and good. But the second thing with the tell, that puts it over the edge. No, yeah, I mean like a punter that half the time gets you 20 net yards because maybe his hang time is bad, or he can punt at 80 yards but doesn't always do it, and the other half the time is amazing. That guy is going to force you to go on for it on fourth down more often, and that can secretly, like as a hidden advantage, make your offense a little bit better. So it could actually be a little bit better for you to have that punter on your roster than not. One of the reasons Jack Fox, who is the Lions punter, who just got an extension, so I guess they value him more than TJ Hawkinson. One of the reasons he's interesting is because he hates his job. He thinks that teams should punt a lot less, and he's pretty vocal about it.
It's the self. I don't want to get into a politics thing, but it is the person who says that they hate the government and then, they get elected to it. Like
the Ron Swanson thing, right?
Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, how did any of this happen? I'm the dog and I caught the car. At least I'm getting paid, I think is what he's saying now. Let's talk about Greg Joseph again. Jake asks, is Greg Joseph purposefully missing kicks to prove how accurate he is? Not only did he hit a doink on the extra point to go up 9, but he also managed to hit a headshot on an Arizona player, which I can only assume is a dig on Kyler Murray's Call of Duty hobby.
Yeah, I think next he's going to have to 360 no scope that headshot, right? He's going to have to spin around mid kick. Yeah.
The meme would suggest that, yeah.
Yeah, that's the next job. Yeah. If he does that, I will agree with the premise of the question.
Maybe he's just doing this in order to like you can keep doing this as long as the Vikings are going to win the games. But like by the end of the year, we need you to win to actually like hit these. Let's throw everyone off your scent as to how good of a year you're going to have. So just intentionally miss some of these, you're going to get some crap for it. But
yeah, and hey, eliminating the expectation that that the game winner is a sure thing. That's really important for the Vikings specifically.
Yeah. So we're doing this Team of Destiny thing. So we need you to somehow find your foot sometime around week 10. So if you can do that,
yeah.
help with the story, that'd be fantastic. Kyle Slaby asks, hypothetical question. You have to watch all the games from your couch, but you can add one deluxe feature to the broadcast for every game. What do you choose? Great booth commentary duo, Manning cast, camera angles defaulted to the All-22, commercials replaced with red zone style cutaways. I had an addition. What if every time you yelled at the TV, it went into the ref's headset?
Okay, that one rules. That's up there. In fact, that might be it actually. Of the Slaby ones, I actually don't think the camera angles defaulting to all 22 is a good thing. That makes the game less dynamic as a viewer to watch. It just makes my job easier, right? And sometimes I want football to be fun. Honestly, give me the stupid close-ups of the center and then zoom out when the running back gets the ball. Fine. It's more fun. It's action. You don't get that view of the field. I can get the all 22. So I don't think the camera angles default to all 20. I do watch the Amazon Primecast. I mean, they do a really great job of making that all 22 extremely entertaining. They do a really good job of that. And maybe if it's that, that would be my option. Manningcast is fine. I think it's played out. I've stopped watching it. Not because it's bad. It's not any worse than the normal commentary typically is. I just don't care about the interviews. I would just rather have Peyton and Eli being Peyton and Eli. And you get actually very little of that.
I wonder if next year they'll like move a little bit more toward the two of them doing that as opposed to the interview thing. Because that's a common complaint this year is that the interviews last year were fun, but now we're a little tired about the whole interview thing. And we'd just like to, again, there was a tweet earlier today or something along those lines of the best part of the Manning cast is when Peyton is making a point about what's happening on the field and then is like making a point, like making a much larger philosophical point, and then Eli just is completely ignoring it and is just reacting to what's happening on the TV. Like it just doesn't care. That's what made them great.
Yeah, and the thing is, last year I got tired of the interviews. I kept watching it because I had already committed, basically.
Yeah.
But they had 4 interviews a game, right? One for each quarter. And only one of them was really ever good. On a good day, you'd get 2, but some days you get 0 good interviews. And it's just like it was consuming so much time.
For every time that you had Joe Buck on, you had Condoleezza Rice.
Right. Yeah. It was just like, I don't need to talk about Condoleezza Rice, but that wasn't a good interview that made the Manning cast more entertaining. It just wasn't. Like the novelty of having actually the Gronkowski one was a good interview. The novelty of having Russell Wilson on, even before all of this stuff about how people don't like Russell Wilson, let's pretend everyone did back then, which I think most people did. That interview sucked. Like it was just novelty, right, to have him. The Manning cast is whatever. If they only did the Manning cast without the interviews, maybe that's my option. But as it stands, no. Commercials replaced with red zone style cutaways. That I think is my choice. I love great booth commentary. Kevin Harlan and Greg Olson are such an underrated comment. Like Tony Romo was great that first year, how he was predicting plays and then explaining how he predicted plays. Now it's a little bit whatever. I think Romo's put a little bit less effort into it, which, if I was in his position, I'd do the exact same thing. That's not a criticism, but it makes the broadcast a little bit less exciting. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman are fine, but I think Aikman, his commentary doesn't add as much as it should for somebody with his history with the game. And it may just be that you always need to have players that more recently played for it to be insightful. But Greg Olsen does such an amazing job of making things entertaining, relating to the viewers, providing perspectives from the player, providing information that you wouldn't necessarily have that's fun or narrative driven, working with the broadcast. His chemistry with Harlan is fantastic, but also he does a really great job educating you about what's going on, even about offensive concepts that he had never done, right? Like, he is taking time to learn about the game and then transmitting it to the viewer in ways that are so easily listenable, right? Which, like, that's the thing, right? Like, a bunch of people, there's a ton of people out there that really understand what's going on in football. A lot of them are coaches, and a lot of them are really bad at explaining to non-football people what's happening. This happens every year in the national championship game for college football, as they bring a bunch of these great coaches together, which have a bunch of interesting ideas. Like, there's 8 of them, right? And only 1 or 2 of them is actually very good or engaging at explaining what's happening on the field, and he's translating it usually from other people. And so that's actually, I insult my colleagues all the time because it's a lot of fun, but it's one thing I really appreciate about Nate Tyson, Robert Mays. They do a very good job of making it approachable, the way that they talk about these complex football concepts, and Greg Olsen does that. So I love great booth commentaries, right? But the red zone style cutaways, love it. Absolutely love it. That is my pick out of those 4, but given your addition of being able to shout directly into the ref's headset, that's my pick.
Yeah, it's too good. The idea that you can just like call in on that's just too good. Cody asks, although Ed Ingram had a glaringly poor performance yesterday, it appeared that Ezra Cleveland once again gave an admirable performance at left guard. After watching and analyzing the tape, would you agree with this sentiment? Also, is Cleveland progressing into an upper tier left guard?
I don't know if that, okay, so I'll answer that second one first. I don't know that Cleveland is progressing into an upper tier left guard, but I think that some of his performances have been impressive and they're worth noting. To me, right now, he is an above average guard, which is well above my expectation for him at guard. I really liked him as a tackle. I thought he needed some seasoning, but the Vikings just didn't have room for him to play tackle, so he became a guard, and I was really worried about that at right guard. He did not play well at left guard. He played a lot better, and I thought he was mostly going to be an average with the ceiling of being an above average guy, and right now his ceiling looks higher, but I don't think that he is necessarily on that trajectory.
Yet. Maybe?
Yet. He could definitely be on it. He is now showing that is within the realm of possibility, which is really cool.
Yeah. The underwhelming Pokemon, which I suppose is a play against Slaby's username. Why do the Vikings feel like they're still trying not to lose instead of playing to win when they have fourth quarter leads, even though they just spent 7 years and 7 years living and losing under that philosophy?
Well, it's like, I don't think it's a philosophy right now. I think the Vikings just aren't good enough. They're not good enough to keep 2-score leads at a consistent basis. If they were more consistent, that'd be better. The Vikings previously did kind of have that philosophy where they would take their foot off the gas pedal until the final year, when they were going to get fired if they didn't do it anyway. But they would kind of just like try not to make mistakes, try not to lose, right? They would try to avoid turnovers, and so they'd make a conservative game plan, and as a result, gradually increase the win probability of their opponent. This year, I don't think that's the case. I think the Vikings are actually very aggressive. So philosophically, it's very different, but they're just not like good. And so I shouldn't say that. They're a good team, right? It's very difficult to be a 6-1 team that's bad. They're a good team. They're just not good enough to consistently win those games.
Drunken Vike asks, it appears that the Vikings hired a Warlock as their special teams coordinator, given the ongoing and magical trend of big special team plays at critical moments. Was the hiring of a Warlock incidental or part of a team philosophy to be better in all areas, including the supernatural? Side question, how powerful a magic user is required to lift the kicker's curse?
Okay, first, we have broken down the difference between warlocks and male witches on this podcast before.
This is your corner now.
I
This
despise
has always
this.
been your corner. You don't even need to look up stuff on. This isn't even like B corner. Like I have to Google this in order to answer it.
Yeah, before the show, I would go. Now I'm just like, okay, no, this is well trodden ground for us. Oh, Warlock.
the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. See us live. Talk to Arif about witches.
I'm so mad. And the thing is, it's not as if when this started that there was some sort of supernatural connection to football that we would be exploring, and I just fell into a rabbit hole. No, I thought the witch talk thing was so funny with hexing the baby witches hexing the moon that I just had to tell you the story, right? And so it was completely independent of football. I just wanted to tell you the story because it was so funny how serious this Twitter thread was, right? And now I'm just like, okay, well, a warlock is when you make a deal with a supernatural, evil, nefarious being that has the ability to possess what you do. It is a moral bad in most pagan traditions, whereas witches are neither. And I'm just like, oh, why am I here? What am I doing? Anyway, Matt Daniels is great. I would not accuse him of being a warlock or entering into that pact. He could be a male witch. That would be fantastic, and maybe there is a coven in the Vikings coaching staff, right? Because it would explain the preposterous number of backup quarterbacks they get to go up against, right? And also these late game shenanigans with the special teams unit, right? So I think that is a possibility. I don't know that there's enough magical power because we've already seen some level of spellcasting mistakes, right? They mistimed Dak Prescott's return, right? And so we've already seen them make a couple of mistakes with the way that they cast these spells and perform these magics. So I don't know that they're at an experience level or a magic level to overcome as deeply rooted a curse as the Vikings kicker curse. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, it was so powerful that Daniel Carlson turned into one of the league's best kickers after he left the Vikings. Like the rubber band effect of getting out of that scenario. It's like how when you quit smoking, suddenly you breathe better than before you started smoking. Like, it's just one of those things.
Well, blessed be. Let's go to MJ, who asks, hey, there's another one. MJ, what do you consider the most...
You're on the team.
Yeah, this time you are. What do you consider the most important statistical trend lines for fans to follow for a team that is winning but could never really be called dominant? How/when will we know if they are a sheep or a wolf?
With the nature of the podcast questions that we get in our mailbag, I cannot tell if that last sentence is like 100% genuine or there is just some like undercurrent of irony that I need to parse. But whatever, I'll just answer it. In terms of the trend lines that are worth following, it's worth trying to figure out what percentage of first downs they get versus what percentage of first downs are available to them. That's called drive success rate. I actually broke it down in a little bit more detail a couple of episodes ago on the Minnesota Football Party. But the idea is essentially if you get the ball, right, let's say at your own 25, you have an opportunity to get one first down, right? So you get that first down. Now you've got an opportunity to get another first down. So you get that first down. Then you get an opportunity for another first down. You don't get it, you punt it. That means 2 out of your 3 opportunities on that drive to get a first down, you got one. So your success rate was 66.67%, right? You add that up over the course of the game, that tells you how good your offense is independent of field position. There's still some small field position effects. Independent of field position at moving the chains. And what's great is that it only very slightly punishes big plays, right? Because a 40-yard pass, right, skips over essentially 4 series where you could have gotten a first down, and so it changes your aggregate, but your drive success rate is going to be the same. And so it does not minimize big plays as much as other success rate metrics do. And that, I think, gives us a good understanding of how offensively and defensively the Vikings are at preventing opponents from doing what they want to do or allowing themselves to kind of like stay on schedule, right? The Vikings are a very streaky team, and that shows up in these kind of metrics. But also, I would just pay attention to something as simple as yards per attempt. You know, if you want to be a little bit more complicated, you could do adjusted net yards per attempt, which subtracts sack yardage from the passing yardage, and it gives you a 20-yard bonus for every touchdown and gives you a 45-yard penalty for every interception. You divide it by the total number of dropbacks, which is attempts plus sacks, right? That on offense and defense is also a pretty good trend line. And the Vikings are not dominant in that category either. There are some other signs that are like red flags to pay attention to, right? Like how often are they recovering fumbles? If it's substantially over 50%, that's a sign that they might regress. If it's substantially below 50%, that's a sign that they could regress positively, right? And you could take a look at turnover differential. If it's extreme in one direction, the other. But those are red flags. In terms of trend lines, those are kind of the two things that I want to pay a little bit of attention to. And if they're better at that sort of thing over the course of the rest of the season, then we'll know, right, that the Vikings are doing a better job of being in control of games and being kind of that dominant, I guess, wolf.
As it were.
As it were.
Beef Brewski asks, one of the things you've said in the past, and now we're asking you to remember things. One of the things you've said in the past is that there is a certain level of QB volatility that makes playoff success more likely. Has anything changed with Kirk's current stats that suggest he's more volatile?
Statistically, if you took a look at, and I have not updated this for this week, but if you take a look at one of the measures of volatility that I look at is your average depth of target. The higher it is, the more volatile generally you tend to be. And the ratio, or the totals rather, not ratio, the totals in terms of the percentage of big time throws and percentage of turnover worthy plays. And so if you have a bunch of big time throws, not very many turnover worthy plays, you're still a volatile quarterback. It's just all good volatility. If it's the opposite, you're a bad quarterback with all bad volatility. But if it's high in both, you're a very volatile quarterback that can be good sometimes and bad some other times, right? And again, the depth of target gets added in there. So I was taking a look at Cousins in terms of volatility, and he is still a below average quarterback in terms of that level of volatility. But the thing is, so he has, a relatively even rate of turnover worthy plays and big time throws, which is a problem. He should be playing better than that. And his average depth of target is much lower this year than it is in most years. So he's not playing that level of volatility. But this only measures his volatility as a passer, and it is not measuring some of the other elements non-statistically that suggests to me that he is a more volatile quarterback than he was in the past. Things like how often he improvises, things like how often he scrambles, things like how often he buys times or makes throws that are not typically in the read progression. Those are things that it seems like he's doing more of that to me suggest that he's willing to embrace a higher volatility play style. But if you're doing it, but you're not throwing it deep, right? If you're a volatile quarterback that tends to throw relatively shallow relative to the rest of the NFL, there's a ceiling on how big your big plays can be and not a ceiling on how bad your bad plays can be, right? Because you throw a pick short and that's a pick six. You throw a pick deep and that's an arm punt. That is substantially different in terms of outcome. And so he needs to make sure that when he does that, he does a better job of making sure that his riskier plays carry a giant reward. One other thing to note that's not included in kind of the volatility metric that I'm using is that I don't have the percentage of contested catches that he throws, but I do have the percentage of contested catches that his receivers win for him, and that is one of the lowest in the league. In fact, I believe it's the lowest in the league right now. That's going to need to bounce back. It probably will because they do have good contested catchers on the team, but it is a very weird circumstance where you've got a skill set on the team that's not being used appropriately, and that might bounce the team back up. So I'll just say that. But how often he throws contested catches would be another part of that. I just don't have that in the data set right now. I could probably add it for next week and take a look at it.
Let's go to Cyward, who asks, in a world where getting turnovers at key moments was a statistic that was entirely sustainable, what would the Vikings' ceiling be?
If it was sustainable, if their ability to just make plays at will was sustainable, the Vikings' ceiling would be the Super Bowl. I don't know what to tell you. They're 6-1. If their 6-1 record was sustainable, this would be an incredible team. They'd win, right? I don't know how else to answer that.
There's already some like angels in the outfield-esque mistakes happening for other teams that the Vikings are like capitalizing on. So,
right. There's a good example of that. So against the Saints, for example, the Vikings forced a fumble on, I want to say, a punt return. I think it was Chris Boyd, right? That's a Vikings player making a play for the Vikings, doing something that he was coached to do, and that's great, right? That doesn't happen very often, but let's pretend, that is maybe everybody on the Vikings now knows how to do the peanut punch, right? And you can increase fumble rates that way. Okay, fine, but like in the Cardinals game, the Vikings turnover on special teams, I mean, the guy just missed the punt. It was just a muffed punt. It wasn't forced by anybody. That's some Angels on the outfield stuff, right? And if the Angels will persistently follow the Vikings to favor them, right? I must be clear that we are not used to heavenly beings favoring the Vikings, or based off the Warlock and Witches conversation, potentially paganistic or satanic beings, depending on what your belief system says about witches. They just generally don't favor the Vikings. They might in the short term, but that's only to set you up for the long term. Now, they could get crushed early on in the game where a late game turnover is not going to mean anything. Guess what? That happened to the Bills. They had 2 late game turnovers, meant nothing, right, against the Packers. So, it could get to that point, right, where they would not still be able to beat, your Eagles, your Bills, your Chiefs, right? And potentially, depending on how Dallas, progresses with Dak Prescott now, Dallas, right? Who knows? So their ceiling is not to be the best team in the league, but there's certainly Super Bowl potential in a team that has the ability in a close game to turn a switch on and win that close game.
All I'm doing is pointing out the double doink and pointing out the stripping of the ball from Amir Marset. All I'm doing.
Yeah. Also, how often are they going to go up against a former teammate where they know the carrying tendencies that they can strip the ball?
I mean, Treadwell got signed to the practice squad of the Seahawks today. So if that turns into a playoff situation,
yeah, I'm sure Treadwell's going to play. I shouldn't be sarcastic about that. This stuff happens to the Vikings all the time.
Yeah, as it turns out. Stampede has an updated question. Stampede said, given that we are trading for Brandon Cooks, oh, that's crossed out, traded for TJ Hawkinson, how will noted Seahawk fan and neo-regressionist Arif be able to continue pushing the false narrative of Vikings being a fraudulent contender bound for regression, especially when his quarterback Geno Smith is a staunch anti-regressionist?
How do you people, and I said you people with intent and malice, how do you people keep on coming up with this stuff? Neo-regression. That's incredible. That's beautiful wordplay.
That is good stuff.
First of all, I don't. Is Geno a staunch anti? I guess he's not regressing. I don't know, but the statistical underpinning of Geno Smith's play is a lot more stable looking, right? And those measures could potentially be unstable. But generally speaking, the measures that he's succeeding at are measures that continue throughout a season, right? And so his good play, I'm not going to say excellent play, his good play is seemingly likely to stay good for a little bit. Who knows? So I don't know that he's an anti-regressionist because he's not defying regression, but he's changing the foundations of his play. A neo-regressionist. Well, first of all, I do sometimes argue that regression is incorrect, right? Like I argued in previous seasons that Adam Thielen will continue to produce touchdowns at a higher rate than his yards would dictate, and I was right about that. I did not make that take this year, and I'm happy I didn't because he's not getting a bunch of touchdowns either. He's like Justin Jefferson in that way. So there are times when I say that the tendency to regression is incorrect, right? Patrick Mahomes' ability to avoid sacks, that is immune to regression. I'm not worried about it. So I'm a neo-regressionist. Look, the Vikings have gotten better as a team, and that was my demand of them. That's all I'm going to say.
Maurice Morth asks, is constant hate sustainable?
Absolutely.
Well, that was creepy. John asks, what does Arif like better about being a national writer? Covering the Seahawks or getting to write about the Packers when they aren't good at football?
I'm not a Seahawks.
That was a great article about the Packers, by the way. It really helped point out that the Packers, I believe it was actually in the headline, the Packers now have to stop pretending.
Yeah, that was the headline. Actually, so I wrote. So I chose that game. So every week I pick a slate of games that I think are worth writing about. And me and my editor go over them, and sometimes we change it. Usually we don't. Um, and sometimes during, on Sunday we'll be like, well, actually, it makes more sense to write about this game than that game. So I chose that game to write about, and and 3/4 of the way in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, I was like, I don't know what to write about for this game. It's just, it's not a contest. It's not an affair, right? Like there's nothing we're getting from this that we didn't already know. And so it took me forever to like think of the angle, and it was like, wait, the issue with the Packers is that we knew, but they didn't. That's the issue with the Packers. So that was my story. I actually was not happy with the story when I submitted it. It wasn't until like I woke up and read it in the morning again that I really liked it. But yeah, we'll link that in the show notes. But yeah, man, that it was fun to write. It was just like I was so stressed when I was writing it. I didn't have I that didn't come off the bat in a way that sounded good. I'll say that.
Chris asks, what do you think the fallout of the Packers ending the season in last place of the in the NFC North would be?
Oh, man. Well, I don't think Matt LaFleur is going to get fired, but I think he gets put on the hot seat for next year in a world where Aaron Rodgers retires, or especially if Aaron Rodgers does not retire, right? That's what got McCarthy canned, right? You've got a Hall of Fame quarterback who's got the ability to play at a really high level, and you can't get them to the playoffs. So it puts a guy who was leading the NFL among active head coaches in winning percentage in the hot seat, which sounds so funny to me. Especially because you get to have Justice on the podcast at least 2 more times that year. So I think the fallout of that would be more entertainment for people who listen to Norse Code. And I think that is the optimal outcome. I think beyond that, a shift in power towards the way that the NFL operates, typically that would change things like, how free agency operates and stuff like that. But the Packers are just not free agency players in general. So the rest of the NFL will probably be, in terms of like the butterfly effect, not all that affected.
It'd just be fun to watch a Packers team be that bad for that long. It's been time. It's been time. Yeah, it's time now. Kenneth Allen asks, if Arif could demand that James institute a new Norse code feature or product in a week, what would he choose?
So someone responded with like a turkey plushie or something like that, I think, to this one, right?
Believe so.
Yeah, that rules. I would love plushies. The problem is that plushies are incredibly expensive merch. I don't even know if you've explored it, James. We haven't really talked about plushies because it's.
We talked about it. We talked about it last year at one point, back when we were discussing whether or not it would be feasible financially to have a life-size throw pillow of you.
Oh,
like a body pillow,
which would kind of be in the same category as a plushie. I didn't
basically. Yes.
My trauma blocked out the discussion.
I forget everything I say once the podcast is over, or at least I get the trauma is blocked out.
Right. But no, I have talked to a number of other content creators who work in merch. I don't know why. I'm not a merch expert. James handles all the merch on our show, right? But for some reason, I get roped into these conversations with content creators that have teams of people, right? And they're just like, hey, Arif, could you look into this for me? And I don't know why. I'm a sports writer. You're a YouTuber who talks about, well, if I actually said the thing I was going to say, I would have revealed who it was. I don't want to. He talks about like video games for a living. I don't know why you're talking to me. Why are we having this conversation? How are we friends? This is great, but I don't have an expertise to offer you. Anyway, I looked into plushies, and incredibly expensive, stupid expensive. I see there's so many content creators that it feels like they would do a great job making money off of plushies as merch. And when you look into it, it's just not sustainable unless you're operating at a really high level or you're charging a lot. For example, Quentin Reviews, by the way, I never talked to him about plushies. Quentin Reviews did a limited run where if you were a $30 a month patron, then you would get a plushie, right? Which is an enormous financial commitment from like a patron, right? Like you just don't get that. I mean, if you wanted to give us $30 a month, we wouldn't mind, but you just don't get that very often. And that's because sometimes the plushies can cost like $70 per unit. It's nuts how stupid plushies are. But if I could just wish it into existence, yeah, North Dakota plushies. That would be so funny. Little Arif with a shotgun plushie, right? A little turkey plushie. I feel like those two could interact maybe. James, obviously, shotgun plushie. That just has to happen, right? Those would be great. But, it's that's a tough one to materialize.
I don't know if you've seen the U2s, Youtooz, the little like statue things. That'd be fun to do if they weren't like $30 a pop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Luke Braun asks, "Hey, I got a really weird couple of letters from the Kremlin asking me about dead drop zones. You know anything about that?"
Please don't involve me in your business with the Kremlin. That feels weird and something that doesn't have anything to do with us.
Yeah, obviously. I mean,
I wouldn't want to be implicated in anything of an international magnitude, especially with a country under as much international scrutiny as Russia. That feels like a you thing. Please don't involve us.
Yeah, that's clearly not mask oriented or anything. That's you. Logan asks,
it'd be weird that anybody would bring up somebody wearing a mask to fraudulently implicate Luke Braun in crimes of international magnitude. That would be weird.
I don't even know why I brought it up.
Yeah, unusual.
Just odd.
I mean, we're reaching for straws here because I have no idea why Luke asked this question.
Logan asks, "What's the best Treehouse of Horror skit and episode?"
Okay, so the one that came to mind, and maybe it's only because it's the most memorable, which doesn't mean it's the best, but certainly that puts it in the category, is the election one. Let's see if I can find out which one that was, because that one is stuck in my mind forever. It's about the 1996 election. It apparently aired in 1996, October 27, 1996, Treehouse of Horror number 7. And Kang and Kodos impersonate Bill Clinton and Bob Dole in order to win the 1996 presidential election. It has a bunch of great jokes, even if you're not an election nerd. But if you are an election nerd, it has even better jokes. They hit a little bit harder. But yeah, I mean, that one, there's so many moments from that, right? Like from the twirling towards freedom that everyone knows, voting for a third party, which is great, but a little bit less known, to we're not holding hands, we're just exchanging proteins or something like that.
Protein strains.
Yeah. Just like a bunch of phenomenal moments throughout the episode that are incredible. So I would recommend that one as one of my favorites, because that is in the golden age of The Simpsons. They knew exactly what they wanted to do and what they were doing. I think the timing and the jokes themselves just hit really well. And it did not have to be a very long skit for that entire episode to become memorable.
I'm going to go with Treehouse of Horror number 3 as my favorite. This series had this episode had Bart with the evil talking Krusty doll.
Oh, that's a good one.
King Homer, the King Kong episode, or the King Kong one.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bart and Lisa inadvertently causing zombies to attack Springfield.
Oh, that was like the pet cemetery.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
Because King Homer has one of the best lines in Simpsons history. It's so funny and so clever that they referenced it on 28 Days Later.
What?
Do you not remember this? So,
no.
In the movie 28 Days Later, spoiler alert for a 20-ish year old movie.
That's the one with the Scarecrow from Batman in it, right?
Yeah. So Christopher Eccleston is one, like, the 9th Doctor is in this movie. I didn't know this until I saw it again like recently. But they end up going to this compound with a bunch of soldiers. Yeah. And one of the soldiers,
and he's one of the a-holes that, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So so Christopher Eccleston's there, and one of the soldiers is sitting and is out of his mind, basically. But he's sitting and talking about his favorite Simpsons moment. And he says, for whatever, like, hand of God, he's talking about his favorite Simpsons moment, and he proceeds to explain that his favorite Simpsons moment is when they do the King Kong thing, and Burns says something to Smithers, and Smithers says, "Well, you know what I think, sir. You know, women and semen don't mix." And Burns goes, "Yes, we know what you think." And that line was in.
It's actually contextually appropriate for that moment in the movie, too.
Yes.
Oh my god.
So like that moment, like it made it into 28 Days Later. Like, I don't know if that's why I have such an appreciation for that joke, but it's really funny. It's really like, it's really sharp, and is definitely one that's going to fly under the radar of your typical like 10 or 12-year-old watcher of The Simpsons in like 1992. So those three, I like that combination for like favorite Treehouse of Horror. HVAC Repairman asks, when are we going to start taking donations to help keep Arif's verified status?
Okay, the only way, so first of all, I do have some degree of skepticism that this plan will roll out. For people unfamiliar, and if you are unfamiliar, I envy you. So Elon Musk bought Twitter, kind of forced his way into buying Twitter. Don't need to get into it. And one of the things that he rolled out, said he was going to implement, was that in order for people who have verified status to retain verified status, they would need to pay $20 a month. Then I guess Stephen King, the novelist, objected, and Elon Musk negotiated with him via Twitter and said, how about $8 a month? I'm already lost here. And then after getting roasted for essentially begging Stephen King for money, which, by the way, the numbers on this don't make... I just want to be clear. The numbers on this don't make sense. There are apparently 420,000 users on Twitter that are verified. Let us be generous and say 300,000 of them would actually pay, right? So that is about, I don't know what, like at the $20 range, like $6 million, right? Of a $44 billion purchase. That is not a 0.1%. That is not a 100th of a percent. That is a 1,000th of a percent of the acquisition cost of Twitter. There's no way that level of monetization will help you at all. Anyway, so then later he says something about a classed verification system between lords and paupers, and it sounded like he was saying that he would open up verification to anybody that was buying Twitter Blue, which would become $8 a month. I don't know what's going on. Seems like a disaster. I'm not even confident that this is going to be implemented. He said that he was going to fire his engineers if they could not implement this product within a week, which sounds like not understanding how products are developed, particularly products with an enormous user base that is constantly online, that is subject to an enormous number of potential security holes that they're constantly patching. But okay, roll out a new feature with a week of programming. Regardless, I would only keep my verification status if, and I have Twitter Blue. I love it, actually. I was surprised at how much I actually really like the features that it has. But I would only pay extra for verification if my work compensated me for it. I would have to ask Pro Football Network, hey, one of the things I'm going to expense you for is this $8 a month Twitter verification fee. And if not, I'm just not going to be verified, and we're all going to have to live with that fact. So
I enjoy that Luke has been trying to take down the value of the whole checkmark thing ever since he got it, and Elon Musk did it in seconds.
Yeah, he's been working on this story for years, and he just tweeted it out.
Yeah, exactly that. Don from Ohio ends this week with, for Arif and James, spoiled kids on Halloween corner. As I sit here on my front porch on a beautiful Halloween night, offering treats, each and every kid who has come up to our house has been ungrateful brats. We didn't have to be out here offering them cans of cream of celery soup or travel-sized bottles of toothpaste, but we made the sacrifice. When did these little hoodlums become so terrible?
There was a neighborhood when I was trick-or-treating growing up in Grand Forks. There was a house that did give you toothbrush and travel-sized toothpaste. And even as a child, I was like, there's no way that this expense makes sense.
Yeah, that.
I was like, this is wildly expensive. As a kid, I'm just like, this is crazy expensive to make some stupid point about candy.
The joke was always that those houses were like the dentist houses.
Right, exactly.
There's a house in Forks that, it's kind of like a neighborhood now, but there's a big house in Forks that really goes all out. And I've known about the house for years. I was good friends with the with not only the woman who runs it, but I was good friends with her daughter in high school. So like I'm well aware of the house's existence. It's like the most popular Halloween place to go in Grand Forks, and I've been waiting for years for my son to be old enough for it, because they really, really go all out trying to scare you with things. This
is pretty close to our neighborhood, or where I grew up, right?
It's actually, well, it's across Washington from it. It's actually over. Okay. It's closer to the main Catholic church in Forks, and is over by that weird Boy Scout building that just sticks out like a sore thumb out on Cherry.
Oh, okay. So I think I've only been there once then.
Yeah.
Oh man, this house goes all out.
So they go absolutely all out. It's fantastic. But I'd been waiting for years for my son to be old enough to not be like traumatized by any of it.
Yeah, that's important.
And I took him over. He went trick or treating on Monday night. Went over to my folks, showed off his Halloween outfit, and then as we start to go back to his mom's, I drive past it. He goes, "Where are you going?" I was like, "I've been waiting for this for years." He's like, "I'm tired." No, sir, you are not. You are going to get more candy, and you are going to like it. Just trust your dad on this one. And we pulled up. We had to park like 2 blocks away. It's that popular.
Yeah.
And we walk over there, and he's a little like hesitant as we're walking over. He's a little tired. The moment that a kid popped out from underneath a bunch of leaves to scare him, he immediately just popped in. He's like, "Oh God!" Like immediately was just having fun, running around, meeting other kids, and like just enjoying. Like there's like 4 houses that go ham on Halloween in this little like 8-house block, and was just having an absolute blast doing it. And it was like one of those like proud dad moments. Like, oh yes, finally. There's a payoff on this. And he's going to ask to do this again. I've got like a small window before he's a teenager and I was about to swear. He's a little something or other.
The thing people say about young teenagers, little blanks.
Yes,
I
that. Agree. It's like I've got a window here I have to take advantage of every year. But we ended up going over there and he's just like raving to his mom about it too. I'm like, I did a thing.
You win. Fantastic.
Fantastic. All right, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, let's plug your work.
Yeah, so I just did winners and losers of the trade. I broke down one of the trades earlier today. I already forgot what trade I broke down. So just head over to profootballnetwork.com/author/ahassan, and you can find my work there. I did, James mentioned the Packers story, which rave reviews, I guess, in the Norse Code Discord, as well as my weekly column, which it talks about Dak Prescott, talks about edge rushers who might bounce back. I tried to see whether or not Daniel Hunter would be one of them. I'm not going to spoil you on whether or not he is, and some other notes around the league. And a little bit on the Christian McCaffrey trade. So that happened for me over the past week. And obviously more is going to be coming up at PFN.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you have enjoyed it. Again, we'll be doing a live show on November 17th at Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota. Check us out. But for our Reef, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.